Once upon a time, there was a troll, big and ugly. He had matted hair and earlobes that went down to his shoulders, and a nose like a potato in the middle of his face. And he had a tail that was swishing from side to side, especially when he was hungry. And the troll was always hungry. And one morning he had eaten 7 plates of porridge and 7 bowls of milk. But he was still hungry. And he walked down the road until he met a cow.
Can I have some cow noises, please?
Hello. Hello, silly moo. I have eaten 7 plates of porridge and 7 bowls of milk, and I am still hungry. And I'm going to eat you too.
Well, oh, silly moo away, said the cow, and he began to run. Everybody on your spot.
Silly moo after you, said the troll. Go! He ate the cow in one go.
Do you think he was full now?
No.
So he continued down the road until he met a
pig.
Hello, Pigwink.
Hello.
I have eaten 7 plates of porridge and 7 bowls of milk and a silly moo. And I am still hungry. And I'm going to eat you too.
Well, oh, piggy wig away, said the pig, and he began to run.
Well, I'm piggy wig after you, said the troll. He ate the pig in one go.
Do you think he was full now?
No.
So he walked down the road until he came to a beautiful red fox.
Hello, Foxy Brush.
Hi, Dad.
I have eaten 7 plates of porridge and 7 bowls of milk and a silly moo and a piggy and I am still hungry and I'm going to eat you too.
Foxy Brush away, said the fox, and he began to
Well,
run.
I'm Foxy Brush after you. Go! He ate the fox in one go.
Put your hands up if you think he's full now.
Not a chance.
You're the right. You're right. Wait.
Oh,
So he walked down the road till he saw a horse.
Hello, Trotty Horse.
Hello.
I have eaten 7 plates of porridge and 7 bowls of milk and a silly moo and a piggy wink and a foxy brush. And I am still hungry and I'm going to eat you too.
Oh, Trotty Horse away! Said the horse, and he began to run.
Oh, Trotty Horse after you, said the horse. And go! He ate the horse in one go.
Bull.
No.
He walked down the road till he came to 5 men digging a ditch.
Hello, ditch diggers.
Oh, God.
I have eaten 7 plates of porridge and 7 bowls of milk and a silly moo and a piggy wink and a foxy brush and a trotty horse and I am still hungry and I'm going to eat you too.
Well, ditch dig away, said the man, and then he
And ditch dig after you, said the troll. And go! He ate the ditch diggers in one go.
So he walked down the road till he saw 7 dancing girls.
Hello, giddy dancing girls. I have eaten 7 plates of porridge and 7 bowls of milk and a silly moo and a piggy wink and a foxy brush and a trotty horse and 5 ditch diggers. And I am still hungry and I'm going to eat you too.
Well, giddy dance away, said the
Well,
man,
giddy dance after you, little troll. Go! He ate the giddy dancing girls in one go.
Bull?
No.
No. He kept walking down the road till he saw a little squirrel.
Hello, bushy tail. I have eaten 7 plates of porridge and 7 bowls of milk, and a silly moo, and a piggy wing, and a foxy brush, and a trotty horse, and 5 ditch diggers, and 7 giddy dancing girls. And I am still hungry, and I'm going to eat you too.
Squirrel away, said Squirrel, and he began to run. And he ran, and he ran, and he ran so fast, and then he saw a tree, and he jumped up, right up to the very top, and he hid in the leaves.
And the troll followed him, but he wasn't as quick. And he didn't catch up with him. And he stood at the bottom of that tree, and he looked up to the branches, and he looked, and he looked, and he looked. But he didn't see the squirrel. But he saw something big and round and yellow. It was the sun. And then the troll burst. Because when trolls see the sun, they burst. So this story leads into a true personal story. Because I grew up in troll country in Sweden, on the shores of a beautiful lake. In the summers it was glittering in the sunshine. In the winter it was an expanse of white snow. And all around it stood tall, stark granite hills, rocks. And on the other side of that lake, there stood Red Hill Rock, a bare granite rock. And in there lived the trolls. And back in the 17th century, just about the time when your ancestors came to this country, my ancestor, Fnaskan, had a farm at the foot of Red Hill Rock. It was a fertile, lush farm, beautiful meadows with lots of green grass. He had cows, he had pigs, he had sheep, he had horses. But one day, his cows and pigs and sheep started to disappear one by one. He didn't know what had happened to them. And he got worried because all his prosperity was about to go. But Fnaskan had a grandmother. And she said to him one day, Fnaskan, I know what is happening. It is the trolls in Red Hill Rock that are taking your animals. And you have to stop it, or you'll be a poor man. And the only thing you can do is to get a bottle of communion wine and give it to the trolls, and you will see what will happen. In those days, back in the 17th century, young people like Fnaskan was respecting the old people. So he listened to his grandmother, and he went to the priest, and he asked the priest if he could have a bottle of communion wine. And the priest actually gave him 2 bottles. And one summer's night, you know, one of those summer's nights up in those northern region where it doesn't get dark in the night, he took one of those bottles and he walked up to the Red Hill Rock. He stood in front of the rock face. He held the bottle of communion wine against it. And as he did so, he could hear rumbling in the rock face. And slowly, slowly the rock face parted, and there was an entrance into the rock. And in there he could see the trolls. They were dancing around and they were swishing their tails. They were probably hungry, because the trolls are always hungry. And he went into that cave. And he gave the trolls a drink of the communion wine. And the trolls were not used to strong drink. And they were definitely not used to the wine that represented the blood of Christ. And they became mad. They went berserk. And they started to hit each other. And they started to kick and bite and claw. And in the end, they had killed each other. They all lay dead on the ground. And Fnaskan stood there and looked at all those trolls. But then he caught out the corner of his eye an old troll hag that was sitting there in the shadows, and she was staring at him with her red eyes. And she said,
I have lived here in Red Hill Rock to see 7 oak forests grow up and 7 oak forests rotten down. But I have never ever seen such a fight as this one in all my life.
And Fnaskan stood there with the empty bottle. And he looked at the bottle and he looked at the troll hag. And then he went up to her and said, if you didn't taste the blood of Christ, you're at least going to taste his bottle. And he brought the empty bottle down on the head of the troll hag, and she fell down dead also. And then he had to look round in that cave, and he saw it was full of treasure, gold and silver. And he grabbed some of the golden coins in his hand and he put it in his pocket. And then he saw there was a beautiful silver goblet. He grabbed that also. But just as he did that, he heard a rumbling in the rock. And when he looked up, he saw how the rock face was shutting. Because outside there was something big and round and yellow. And the rock face had to shut because the trolls would burst if they saw the sun. And Fnaskan ran out and he just squeezed through just before the rock face slammed shut. And then he went home. But next evening, he came with his whole family and all his farm workers and all his farm maids, and they had boxes and they had baskets, and he had the other bottle of communion wine. He was going to collect the rest of the treasure. But this time when he held out the bottle in front of the rock face, it didn't open. It was still and silent. And he had to go back home again. But he had that silver goblet, and he had a handful of gold coins. And with that handful of gold coins, he could buy himself a bigger and more prosperous farm at the end of that beautiful lake. And that lake, that farm, has been in my family ever since that day. And when I was a child, my grandfather was farming that farm, and my father grew up on that farm. And when my granddad died, my uncle took over. And when my uncle died, my cousin Magnus took over. And he is still farming that farm. And that silver goblet is still in the possession of my family. And if ever you would like to go to Sweden and see that silver goblet, just come and ask me and I can tell you where you should go and find it. And when I was a teenager, I was fascinated by that treasure that was still hiding inside the Red Hill Rock. And me and my friend used to go round the rock face, and we looked in all the crevices to see if we could find an entrance in, but we never found one. We even went to the priest and asked him if he could give us a bottle of communion wine to open the rock face with. But this time the priest was not as accommodating as he had been to my ancestor Fnaskan. So we never found that treasure, and it is still hidden inside the rock. But I could never forget that treasure. And it has inspired me to look for treasure all my life. And maybe I have learned throughout the years that the most important treasure is not gold and silver and precious stones. There are other qualities in life that are precious to find.